Hello, guys. Hi. I welcome you once again to our WASI History TV. And I guess you are enjoying the various lessons that have been posted here. Before we begin with our lesson for today, I would urge you to subscribe to the channel and also, if you have subscribed, thank you for your subscription. If you have not, you should also subscribe. And if you have already, also recommend it to your friends or share on your pages for your friends in other schools. And we promise you to bring you educative, informative, and very entertaining content. Yes, in our previous videos, the last video that we did, we looked at the nationalist activities in the Gold Coast from 1900 to 1945, and we basically saw two stages whereby there were a proto-nationalist and also the militant, of course, nationalist. Then we looked at one of the proto-nationalists, and that was the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, which actually sought to resist the land bill, which was introduced by Brantford, or Governor Brantford, as well as Sir Maxwell, in both 1894 and 1897, respectively, to vest all lands in the Gold Coast to the British Crown. And we saw how the educated elite used the Aborigine to resist. And as I said, that was a very, very notable achievement of the educated elite, because the issue of land had been always a bigger problem in the colonies, and we cited examples in Kenya and other areas whereby this became a very big problem. So today we are going to look at yet another interesting organization known as the National Congress of British West Africa, the NCBWA. Here it looks like we have West Africa here, so it's kind of, you are thinking, is this Gold Coast or West Africa? Yes, both the Gold Coast and also West Africa. So the National Congress of British West Africa, we will look at the aims, their demands, their resolutions, their achievements, and their failures as well. Good. So let's begin with that of our lesson objectives. So one, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to outline the demands of the NCBWA, and again identify the achievements of the NCBWA. And the last thing will be the failures, what the NCBWA could not achieve as a society, what they sought out to achieve and yet could not achieve as what a society. So let's begin with that of the NCBWA. Now, the National Congress of British West Africa, the NCBWA, was formed in Accra in March 1920, and it was formed by J.E. Castley Hayford, and he is the man in your picture over here, as you have seen him over there, J.E. Castley Hayford. He actually founded the National Congress of British West Africa. And he was actually a Secondee lawyer. He was a lawyer who lived in the Secondee. So you see that the people of Secondee has actually, they really have played a major role in the struggle for self-rule in the Gold Coast. Because if you look at Power Grant and co, so the Gold Coast, the people of Cape Coast, as well as, of course, Secondee, they have played a significant role in the struggle process for independence. Now, this movement, or this Congress, as we have said, differed from that of the ARPS, the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, in two ways. So we have looked at the Aborigines, but we are saying that this Congress, or this new organization, was different in the sense that the first difference was that its middle class nature and the lack of attachment to the chiefs. And also the second is its activities and demands went beyond the frontiers of what? Of course, of the Gold Coast to the British West Africa territory. So we are saying that the National Congress of British West Africa is different from that of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society in two ways. One, the Congress was made up of middle class people only, unlike the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, whereby both the educated elite and the non-educated chiefs were all, part of the organization. Again, it also lacked attachment to the chiefs, as we have said. So here, there is no chief in here, but only educated elite. More so, its activities and demands, that the aims and the demands that this Congress wanted, also went beyond the frontiers of what? The frontiers of West Africa. Okay, it went beyond the frontiers of West Africa, in the sense that in the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, we saw that they were demanding for things which were only related to Africa. Okay, sorry, my machine is just messing me up. Sorry for that interruption. Now, they were only demanding for what? For issues or things happening only in where? In the Gold Coast. That was the Aborigines. But we are saying that the National Congress of British West Africa had their demands, far beyond. They were demanding things for all the British West African colonies. So Gambia, of course, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, of course, the Gold Coast, the 4 British colonies was what was, they were demanding for. And so, in essence, the NCBWA could be seen as the first interterritorial nationalist movement formed in the British. Interterritorial then here means that now things, the educated elite were now collaborating with other educated elite in other British territories to demand for independence, and this was the first of its kind, unlike the Aborigines, whereby we saw that only the educated, of course, the demands were only met in the Gold Coast. Sorry for that interruption. I don't know why today. Maybe some, of course, like witches are trying to play with my machine. But let's move on. And so, in all, we had 52 delegates that attended the inaugural meeting of the NCBWA. 6 of these were from Nigeria. We also had 3 of them from Sierra Leone. We had 1 from Gambia and 42 from the Gold Coast. And so the Gold Coasters were the majority who actually attended the Congress. And this, we are saying, was the first time, or the first interterritorial nationalist, which means that it went beyond the frontiers of the Gold Coasters, or the Gold Coast. Now, the Congress then elected T. Houghton Mills as the president, and then J.E. Castle-Hayford, who was the brainchild behind the NCBWA, became the vice president, and then Dr. F.V. Nanka-Bruce and L.E.V. McCarthy were also appointed as joint secretaries, and then A.B. Cote Papafio and H. Van Hain as also joint treasurers. So these people also became joint treasurers to the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Yes, so you take notice that it was only made up of middle class people. There wasn't any chief. Their demands were also far beyond the frontiers of the Gold Coast. They were demanding for things for the whole of British West Africa, unlike the Aborigines that were only demanding for reforms in the Gold Coast. So let's then look at the demands of the NCBWA. One, the delegate of the NCBWA drew up 82 resolutions, which of course covered 12 topics. 82 resolutions, and they covered 12 topics. This at this time it was an international organization, and therefore, if they had 82 demands, you should know that these demands covered all the regions, all the 4 colonies of British West Africa. Now let's look at the first of the demand of the Aboriginal Right Protection Society. Now the Legislative Council in British West Africa should have half, which is 50, of its membership directly elected, and they were demanding for a half representation based on elective principle in all the 4 British West African countries. They were demanding that in all the 4 British West African countries, we should have a 50, half of the members in the council being elected instead of being appointed by the governor. And again, there should be a West African House of Assembly made up of all the members of the legislative councils plus 6 financial representatives elected by the people to control revenue and expenditure. So you can see the idea of the diseducated elite. Fine, they want 50% of the legislative council members to be elected in all the 4 colonies. Then they also want a West African House of Assembly, whereby all the legislatures in the various colonies would meet to discuss issues pertaining to the whole of West Africa. Good. And then there should be also the establishment of a municipal councils dominated by Africans. So municipal councils should also be established that would be made up of Africans, and we still have these things happening. We still have these municipal councils being established now today, district councils and all of that, and so this was the beginning of such agitation for such reforms to be made. And then the civil service should be Africanized, in the sense that there should be more Africans elected or included in the administration process. More Africans should be included in the administrative process. Good. And then Syrians and Lebanese traders should also be expelled from West Africa. Syrians and of course the Lebanese traders were also to be expelled from West Africa, in the sense that these Syrians and Lebanese had taken over the retail, of course, market in the colony. And the worst of it all was that the European banks were also in support of these Lebanese traders. They were giving them loans, whilst the Africans were not considered when it comes to loan. And so the African trader, or the Gold Coasters, or the West Africans in all the colonies, the traders in there were disadvantaged. Of course, they were disadvantaged because of the fact that they did not get access to loans. So they did not become competitive. And so they were demanding that these, of course, Syrians and Lebanese traders should be expelled from West Africa. And indeed, these, of course, Syrians and Lebanese are still, most of them, if you go to the West African countries, most of them are still there. They are still controlling a lot of the economy, because if you look at Ghana, for instance, I think Melcom is for a Lebanese or so, and they are doing quite well. They are owning big shops and all of that in the country. So they were demanding for that. The right to install and also depose chiefs should continue to be in the hands of the people. And don't forget that with the introduction of the British rule, we also said that the British brought up something that we call the warrant chiefs, whereby chiefs were appointed to areas where there were no chiefs. And also, the British colonial governor could depose and install chiefs at any time that they wanted. And this was not customary. This really was not the right way to go. And so, therefore, the educated elite were demanding that that should still continue to be in the hands of the people. The people should be the ones to have the right to depose or to expel their chiefs, instead of the British interfering in that sense, or in that local politics. a West African university should be established. Now, at this point, by 1920, there wasn't any university, I think, in the British West African colonies, and so they demanded that a West African university should be established for all the West African colonies. Then a law making education compulsory be enacted, and that the standard of primary and secondary education should be raised. So there should also be a law which would make education compulsory, you understand, and also the standards of primary and also, of course, secondary education should be raised. And these were educated elite, and so if you critically examine the demands of these educated elites, you shouldn't be surprised, because it's all about education in some sense, and in the other way they are also agitating that they are giving representation, majority representation on the legislative assembly. So you see here that it looks as if the educated elite had, alienated the chiefs, and they were also fighting for themselves, because the chiefs were being given more representation at the expense of the educated elite. And so and if you also look, of course, quite critically to of course, the demands and the resolutions, you also see quite an international feature in there, because they are asking for the things for all the West African British colonies, the 4 British colonies of West Africa, which of course obviously was not only linked to the Gold Coast, you understand, as we had seen in the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Fantastic, good. So let's move on to the next one, the achievement. So were they able to achieve, these demands? Were the educated elite able to achieve these demands as we have stated on? Were they able to build a university? Were they able to have the 50% majority? Were they able to have the House of Assembly for, of course, legislative assembly for the West Africans? Were they able to, of course, achieve all the things that we had demanded? But before we come to the achievement, let me make it clear here. Sorry for that. After these demands were drafted, they actually sent also a delegation, like that of the British, the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. The NCBWA also sent a delegation to England on September 1920, and they stayed in England till January 1921 to present this petition to the colonial secretary at that time, to have a look at and do something about it. But surprisingly, unlike the Aborigines, who of course succeeded in having or in meeting Joseph Chamberlain, who was then the colonial secretary, and had the land bill cancelled or abolished, cancelled or abolished. These NCBWA delegates, were not even given an audience by the colonial secretary then, who was called Lord Milner. Lord Milner did not even grant them, of course, the audience. Even though they stayed there for quite some months, they were not able to meet the colonial secretary, Lord Milner, and therefore their constitutional and, of course, judicial reforms that they were asking for were all rejected. That's quite deep, that's quite sad, and that's quite embarrassing, because if you've been there since September 1920, stayed there through to January 1921 in the bid to see the colonial secretary, and you are not giving that audience, that's quite, of course, a blow. It was a big blow to them, and this shouldn't be surprised, because we already know that the British were on the side of the chiefs. They were interested in making the chiefs become a majority on the legislative council, and so they didn't, of course, they didn't want to have anything to do with the local, of course, the local the educated elite, and therefore this should not come as a surprise to us. But let's look at the achievement of the NCBWA, if they were able to achieve some of the things that they said they would achieve, even though some of their, they were not granted audience. The first one was that the principle of elective representation for the first time was introduced into the 1922 Constitution of Nigeria, 1924 Constitution of Sierra Leone, and 1925 Constitution of Ghana. So yes, you remember they were asking for a 50% representation on the Legislative Assembly. And in some way, in somehow, they didn't get the 50%, but that elective representation was introduced. And that was also quite a significant improvement. Because if you look at the Constitution of 1925 of Ghana, the Kajesberg Constitution, it was the first time that the elective principle was, introduced into the Constitution, whereby the people were given the right to vote. And if you go to Sierra Leone, of course, the 1924 Constitution, in Nigeria, 1922 Constitution, in all these constitutions, it granted the people some level of right to vote for their own members. Okay, so yes, they were able to achieve, but I'm not sure they were able to get the 50% as they had wanted, but we can also take that away from them. Good. Let's look at the next one. The Congress was also the first practical attempt of Pan-Africanism, which sought to unite the African elite to fight for a common sense. Pan-Africanism in the sense that, unlike the Aborigines, which was only localized, this Congress or organization was actually an international one, trying to bring all the British West African colonies under one umbrella as brothers and sisters who were fighting for a common cause. And so we term that as Pan-Africanism, as we already know it. So the activities of the Congress, the colonial administration gave its blessing to higher education with the establishment of Achimota College in Ghana, Prince of Wales College in Sierra Leone, as well as the Armitage College in the Gambia. You also remember in the last two demands or resolutions of the NCBWA, they were demanding for some reforms in some laws being made to improve education, and even of course went further to ask for the establishment of a university in the Gold Coast. And so we are seeing that the colonial governor for the first time established a school. Don't forget that before the colonial government's establishment of these schools, there were missionary schools also available already. You understand? But just that the colonial governor had not actually established a school. And so the Achimota College in Ghana became the first colonial school or government school, if we may put it today, government school established. And then if you go to the other British territories, you also meet other schools which were also funded by the British. Then it was also through the agitation of the Congress that the medical services in British West Africa was also open to Africans. The medical, of course, services, so which means that a lot of the medical services, the hospitals that were established by the Europeans, were actually not for Africans. Africans were not allowed to visit those hospitals. And so if you were sick, you were not allowed, and a black man or an African, you were not allowed to have the services of those hospitals. But through the agitation of the National Congress of British West Africa, now Africans were asked or were allowed to also patronize the services of these hospitals, which were opened by the Europeans. Then the last one, the Congress also succeeded in getting established the West African Court of Appeal to serve the 4 colonies. The court was not subject to the control of the governor, and thus, to some extent, injected confidence in the administration of justice in the colony. So the 80 demands, there were many, but I just chose to bring about 10 or so of them, but there were a lot of them. They were also demanding for a West African Court of Appeal for the 4 colonies, and this was also achieved, and this was to, of course, ensure that justice was served in the colony. And the most interesting thing, or good thing about this court was that the court was not subject to the control of the governor, which then means that the court was independent, which was a good thing for them, because the court can take up its own, make its own decisions and judgment without being influenced by the governor. Good. Let's then look at the failures of the Aborigine. Let's look at some of the failures of the Aborigines Right Protection Society. Good. So what were some of the things that the Aborigines could not achieve? Okay, what they could not achieve, some of the failures. One, the Congress did not consult the colonial government before sending, of course, delegations to the Secretary of State for the colonies in London. Hence, the Congress was attacked by Gettysburg and Hugh Clifford. So remember that we had already established that they were denied audience. Lord Milner, the colonial secretary in London, denied them audience because of the fact that they also did not also inform the colonial government before going to London. At that time, Gettysburg and Hugh Clifford were there at that time, and they did not consult these people before going to England, and so they were attacked by these British governors. Again, the Congress did not have a broad-based support. It was made up of only educated elite, and therefore did not align with the ordinary people who constituted the greater percentage of the population. So you see that the educated elite, or the educated class in general, they seem to always believe that they can do it by their own. Okay, relegating the mass people or the mass to the background. They don't really see the impact of these people. But let me tell you, this is what Nkrumah did. Of course, that made him very popular. They using the masses. When the market women decide that we are voting for you or we are supporting you, I bet you have won the election. But this educated elite refused to get the support of the masses. The same failure that the Aborigines Right Protection Society also did. And so they were only restricted to the rural areas, or the urban areas, like relegating the rural areas to the background. Good. Now let's then look at the next one. Also, the Congress failed to bring the chiefs, who were then more powerful and influential, to their fold. In fact, the chiefs became hostile towards the Congress, as they regarded it as an attempt to usurp their traditional function as leaders of the people. So you see here, they are getting opposition from both the chiefs and again from the colonial governor, because they refused to bring the chiefs. And at this time, the chiefs were the most powerful and influential people in the community. They were the ones whom, if they tell the people to sleep, they will sleep, because they are chiefs. You understand? And so their failure to include the chiefs, who at this time were very, very powerful, was also a problem. And it got to a time that the chiefs were actually accusing them of usurping their power, which the people will not agree, and the British will also not agree. So you can imagine the whole situation, is going to be like for the NCBWA members. Now again, the Congress did not set up any effective machinery to carry out its plans. The absence of a central secretariat to coordinate its activity in the colonies meant that it did not work together. So there wasn't any effective, machinery. Almost like the Aborigines, they were not really having that, effective machinery to carry out the plans of it. And this, because of this, they could not coordinate their activities in both the colony and, in other areas, and all of that. And I think the last one was also the death of Castle Hayford, who actually was the brainchild behind the NCBWA. He was actually the moving spirit, the brainchild. He died in 1930, and this brought the whole movement to its knees, as the replacement was not immediately available. He was the man who was championing this NCBWA. And so his death in 1930, 10 years after the establishment of the NCBWA, also was a big blow to the educated elite, and they never were able to find a quicker or immediate replacement for him, and so the NCBWA collapsed. But in all these, we know that they, like the Aboriginal Right Protection Society, they were able to achieve some of the things that they had actually been asking for or demanded, and I think that should be the credit for them, even though they collapsed at a point. But they were able to achieve, and today some of us are enjoying some of the struggles and some of the achievements that they really were agitating for. Good. So I think this has also been a very interesting lesson for today. But before that, I think I have some questions here to give you. You can try your hands on them. This was the May-June WASI 2016 that you can try your hands on. If you have nothing doing, you can try your hands on them. Good. And of course, thank you for watching. We shall meet again some other time. Bye bye. Thank you.